Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Welcome to another episode of the 2026 edition of the Selling to Corporate podcast. That sounds very fancy, doesn't it? I'm here, also joined by Max, who is currently having a sneezing fit. So we'll see if we can edit those out for you. I'm sure that Scott will be able to work his usual magic. You'll have to forgive me on today's episode. I recently had minor mouth surgery, so I am still trying to talk with a swollen face. It's quite the challenge, if I'm honest. But I wanted to make sure that I got our episodes out. And so if you do notice me stumbling over words, it's just annoying. But I am at least, off of all of the painkillers and things that they make you take after the minor mouth surgery, which is good. And I have even braved my first light gym session since, which was a little bit of a concern because apparently, I didn't know this, you may not know it either, but apparently if you have dissolvable stitches and you do anything that increases your blood pressure, you can be at risk of bursting the stitches and then your mouth would bleed, obviously. Now, I thought about this when I was in the gym doing my first session back, very light weights. And I thought to myself, I just don't know what would happen and who would be more shocked. Would it be me that would be shocked and mortified? Or, would other people rush over and think that I had some kind of, nightmare scenario caused by very heavy weights and then they would be surprised by me and my 5 kilo dumbbells? Who knows? And luckily, I will never find out because it didn't happen. So you'll all be very glad to know that I'm taking care of my health and that things are going well. But if you have emailed me in January and you've had slower replies than normal, don't worry. I was just in the haze of the painkillers and thought, probably not going to open up my inbox and start replying to people at this stage. But today's episode, very exciting. We're talking about the difference between decision makers and influencers on the podcast today and why it matters, because I have spoken to a lot of people over the course of 2025. And as we've started 2026, I talked in the last episode about the fact that it's been a pretty busy start to the year. I had my first planning retreat of January, which was really, really exciting. We had people fly over from Ireland. We had people fly down from the north of the UK because of the crazy snow weather. And, I've had lots of conversations with even the corporate companies that I'm working with about lead generation and about what contributes to the success of lead generation efforts and what the challenges are. And actually, I think one of the major challenges is that people aren't always generating the right kind of leads. And so in today's episode, we're going to explore what the difference really is between a real qualified lead and an influencer who is important and can be, a useful contact, but isn't actually going to help you generate revenue. So that is the hot button topic for today. I'm very excited about it. I've got key points and everything. But first, remember, when we talk about leads and lead generation, this episode is actually sponsored by the Expert Services Directory, which is the best place for you to generate qualified inbound leads if you are a coach, consultant, a speaker or trainer who wants to sell to organisations in the UK. So if you are somebody who is a very busy coach, consultant, speaker, trainer, service provider who wants more qualified prospects to get their eyes and buying power on your services, and you are somebody who has all of the best intentions, particularly around this New Year period, when it comes to proactive lead generation, but you're finding it difficult to manage and you're finding it difficult to be consistent because as part of your role as small business owner and wearer of all the hats, you are also busy delivering to clients, getting ready to move your own business forward, create new services, price different offerings, write proposals, actually do all of the normal day-to-day life stuff outside of your business. And you really, really want to just generate inbound leads and qualified inquiries who actually want your expertise and have the budget to pay you, then you need to go to expertservicesdirectory.com and use the code podcast, all in caps, at the checkout to grab your spot. We've actually had a huge surge in inquiries this month because it's January, it's New Year, means a lot of permanent headcount is leaving. We're seeing lots of people who have taken time off over Christmas to be with their families and realise they don't actually like their jobs. And then, it comes to January and they hand in their notice. And so organisations are trying to get external suppliers to help cover off some of the programs and projects of work that those people will have been doing. Add that to the fact that most organisations at this time are looking to get external suppliers anyway because they want to execute upcoming strategic plans that they've got running. So if you feel like you've been doing everything possible to run your business, to generate new leads, but it's not really been working as well as you think, and you're sick and tired of posting on LinkedIn because all it's getting you is annoying requests from junior employees who are literally just benchmarking their current services instead of actually being the buying power behind new business, then make sure you go to expertservicesdirectory.com, use the code podcast, all caps, at the checkout, and you will get an extra special gift as well. And it's a really useful special gift. So, Plus, I will even give you the amazing guidance that we've been providing to all of our Expert Services Directory users to write up their best performing bios and about sections to attract inbound leads from decision makers that they actually would want to work with. All right. So if you want to spend the next 12 months supplementing your lead generation, getting some things that are inbound that you don't have to think about, then go to expertservicesdirectory.com, use the code podcast at the checkout. You get an extra special free gift as well. Love that. Just for being a podcast listener. And you'll also get the guidance that's really helped to write listings and bios for people that have been generating inquiries from qualified leads. And of course, I review every single listing that goes into the directory as well. So if you write it and I think, no, that does not adequately portray your specialisms and genuine gifts, then I will tell you, and I will also make recommendations for you so that we can make sure that you get the absolute best listing that's going to produce the best result for you. So that's at expertservicesdirectory.com and use the code podcast. All right. So before we start talking about decision maker versus influencer, which makes it sound a little bit like some kind of wrestling match is going to happen, I can assure you it is not that exciting. But before we dig into the differences between them, I just want to touch on this idea of the best method of lead generation. Because over the last few months, I've been asked a lot, Jess, what's the best method of lead generation? What's the thing that works best for everybody? And it's difficult because there are methods of lead generation that work really, really well. Unfortunately, most of those methods of lead generation, and I teach 7, by the way, so, you could say I have a lot of data across lots of different methods of lead generation and people using them and different countries and all these kinds of things. But most of them require something that people intensely dislike: consistency. And that is really, really difficult because on the internet at large, there are people, and I see it every day, because just like you, I scroll the internet and I get targeted with ads and I see people and they say, oh, the best method to generate leads right now is holding webinars for companies. And obviously I laugh because I know loads of decision makers inside organizations And I've seen organizations who sell B2B, not B2C, but B2B, who have tried webinars and they do not work. Because how many corporate decision makers do you know that have got time to spend watching an hour-long webinar and then getting 7 days worth of emails in a sequence? It's daft. That's me off on a tangent about webinars. But my point here is I see the same ads that you do. And, I see the people who've made something work really well for them. And I've always thought this was really quite a dangerous narrative in the online space, is that you see a person and they make a lot of money by doing something, that has worked for them. And then they say, it is the one way. It is the only way because it has worked for me. But then they don't have any ability to troubleshoot it because it has only worked for them in that iteration. Or maybe they've learnt it from somebody else. And so they're trying to teach it, but they don't know how to pull out the troubleshooting. So they perpetuate this narrative and they do a lot of great marketing around it. This is the best way to generate leads. It's email marketing or bust. It's LinkedIn or bust. It's posting X many times a day on whatever social platform or bust. It's networking, it's speaking, it's whatever. And it isn't. It's not that that is the best method of lead generation. It's that that person has the right personality, has the right amount of time, has the capacity to generate leads in that way. And so for whatever period they've done it for, it has been what they qualify as a success. But just because it's the one method that they have enjoyed or seen results from, it doesn't mean it's right for you. And so I want to move away from this narrative that there is a one best method of lead generation or one best question to ask on sales calls or one best way to, create your workshop. Because there isn't. There are proven techniques, there are proven strategies that have the ability to work for you and generate the results that you want if you are prepared to be consistent at executing them. And over the years, and on this podcast, we've talked to people who've been super successful using various different methods of lead generation that I've taught them. Everything from speaking for leads to email outreach to using LinkedIn proactively to some weird and wonderful things that I've hidden inside the C-suite vault forever, never to be seen in the light of day. But it wasn't the fact that they were using a hot button strategy at that time. It was the fact that they were consistent, that they knew what their targets were, in terms of their target levels of activity. It was that they knew how to position their messaging when executing any of those methods of lead generation. And most importantly, it was that they knew who they were targeting. And that's the real meat and potatoes, if you like, of this episode, because I think a lot of people, when they think about lead generation, they don't realize how important it is. On a theoretical level, we all get it. If you don't have leads, you're not going to have sales calls. It's quite a simple equation. But we don't do enough consistent lead generation as business owners. We just don't. We do it in small bursts. We're relatively inconsistent with it. I'll have people who say, I've tried to, my favorite phrases, I think, or not favorite phrases, probably my least favorite phrases because it means that somebody's really disappointed. But my most heard phrases are things like, I've tried to get this off the ground, or I've had a go at doing lead generation, or I've generated some leads, but it just hasn't worked out the way I expected. People don't understand necessarily the market mapping that's involved. They don't understand the quality assurance that's involved in terms of choosing your decision makers, in terms of, writing your messaging or crafting your messaging around it, and in terms of the actual volume that you need to do and the consistency that you need to have. And instead, everybody just kind of focuses on, I just need more sales calls. And I think, well, no, you need a lead generation process or processes that work. And that's the reality of it. There is no one best method of lead generation. But I tell my clients all the time, you should absolutely be looking at a volume method of lead generation. And by that, I mean a method of proactive lead generation that you can use at high volume. So something like email outreach, for example. And you can supplement that with something else that you're actually just more interested in. Because let's face it, cold email outreach is a lot of work on the front end to define your messaging and targeting. But the rest of it is kind of copy, paste, schedule, batch, which is nice, but boring. Whereas other things like networking for leads, some people get a lot out of. Personally, I like to stay at home and sit in my pajamas, but some people, and I had one of my clients who came to one of our planning retreats in December, and they said that they had just done networking last year for leads. They'd used the strategy inside the portal, and they had had their best business year ever. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, the thought of like leaving my house and going and seeing people in a room that I don't know, that I have no idea what they're going to be like. I just that's a lot of work. But they love meeting new people, you know? So what I'm saying here is, A, different strokes for different folks when it comes to lead generation. B, you should have methods of lead generation that are leading to sales calls in your business. And if you're not, so if you don't have a lead generation process or processes that are leading to qualified sales calls with at least 5 sales calls being held each month, then you have a lead generation problem. And actually it's one of the reasons that something like the Expert Services Directory is so effective, because not only are you part of a directory which is searchable online completely, but we also directly market the areas of specialism and you to decision makers who know what they're actually looking for. So it's a great way to supplement any proactive lead generation that you're doing, but also to just generate inbound leads and inquiries from qualified decision makers, And that's always the case with lead generation. As with any sales activity, people ask me, how much should you do? And I say, well, how much you do will directly impact how quickly you generate the results that you want and the volume of result that you want, So if you send out, 10 cold outreach emails a week with 0 follow-ups, you are probably not going to get very many leads at all from that. Even if you did it for a whole year, you'd be somebody who sat there at the end of the year and you said, yes, I've sent out 10 emails every single week to new decision makers, and that takes me to 520, emails that I've sent cold, and I didn't get one thing from it, and I wouldn't be surprised. Because if you haven't worked on the quality and volume and targeting pieces of whatever outreach strategy you employ, whether it's email, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's speaking, whether it's networking, whether it's any executive effort, you are not going to see the result that you want. Okay. It's got to be sustainable. It's got to be consistent, and you've got to have clear metrics around it. And one of those key pieces, because we've talked there about really the 3 reasons that lead generation wouldn't work. Every single lead generation strategy, and I know I slated webinars for corporates earlier, but let's be honest, most of you who listen to this podcast have probably had a corporate job at some point. If somebody had said to you, hey, in your really busy week when you're working 40 to 50 hours, do you want to take time out for 45 minutes to an hour to listen to a framework or something from some entrepreneur that you've never met, and then be subjected to 7 emails, 1 a day every day with a really long reason around why you should buy from them? Would you have done it? And the answer obviously is no. Right? So, but outside of that, every lead generation method for B2B does have the potential and capacity to work. You've just got to use the right strategy around it. You've got to have the right targeting around it, and you've got to have the right messaging and volume as well. And those are the only 3 reasons that your lead generation strategy wouldn't be working. Just to define that super clearly for everybody, the only 3 reasons that your lead generation strategy is not or would not be working are your targeting. So you're not targeting the right decision makers, and we'll talk about that in this episode. Your messaging, which is actually the one that everyone worries about, but is easy to remedy or simple to remedy if you know what you're doing and what you're focusing on from a sales perspective. and volume. Just not doing enough and not being consistent enough to actually see the result you're expecting. And that's the same for any lead generation strategy. You know, even something like networking. I was talking about my client a minute ago there, and, they had great success with it, but they attended, I think it was like 2 events each month for a whole year. And we were able to look back at the end and go, well, these are the events that we would attend again this year based on metrics, results. And these are the ones that actually wouldn't be a benefit, and could be replaced by something else, a different lead generation activity or different event or whatever. So it always comes down to targeting, messaging, and volume. And that is what matters. And obviously, one of the most important is that targeting piece. And that's what we're here to talk about. Because most people get really quite confused about the targeting piece because they don't know how to tell the difference between somebody who is a real decision maker, i.e., somebody who is actually going to be in charge and have final sign off in the buying process for your area of specialism, and somebody who is an influencer in the process. So somebody who might help or support the decision maker, somebody who might introduce people to the decision maker, or help them find options. It might even be somebody who would be the end user of a service that you provide. You might be a really great executive coach, for example, and so you might come across lots of people on social media who are like, oh, I would love executive coaching, but in their organization, they're just not the person who buys them, and they don't have final sign off on it. So, it doesn't mean that influencers are not important or that they're not good to build relationships with, but it does mean that they don't actually have any real buying power for your services. And this is where the problem lies for a lot of people, because I see people who will either be confused about the difference, or they'll spend so much time talking to people who are very clearly influencers who don't have the confidence or the internal cachet at the organization they work with to successfully influence the organization to actually move forward with the sale. And that's really problematic. And I see so many entrepreneurs who spend so much time, genuinely so much time and energy on talking to people because they might be able to introduce them at some point to their boss or whatever. And I hear that all the time. Oh, I'm talking to this person and, I've had 3 calls with them and they really like me and they're just trying to find the right time to introduce me to their boss, or they're just trying to find the right time to put me in front of HR because it's busy right now and they don't really know whether it's something that they are going to take forward, or, they're talking to an influencer who guards the relationship with the real decision maker like it's the Lord of the Rings secret quest. It's difficult to ask somebody who lacks confidence or lacks the internal network to sell you in when they are not capable of doing that. And that's really where a lot of these lead generation processes get stuck, because you feel like you are spending your time having calls with this person, you're building a great relationship, they always want to talk to you, they always say that you're giving them great insights, but nothing really comes back. And that can be a sign that you are talking to an influencer rather than a decision maker, but it can also be a sign that you are not necessarily driving forward your overall sales process in the way that you need to be, because there are useful influencers. There are influencers that you can support to help them make really great introductions, and to help you find out more about the organization whilst you spend valuable time and energy doing business development in other areas of the organization and finding other contacts. But most people are not doing that in their sales process. And as a result, it means their sales process is stalled. And it means that I'm going to use the phrase wasting time, because they're spending lots and lots of time and energy on cultivating relationships with influencers who are not going to be able to push them up the chain to the actual sale. Okay, so what are the differences then between a decision maker and an influencer? And I think here's where people would like me to be really black and white and be like, well, if you are a coach in, I don't know, leadership development, then you should only target these people. These are the decision makers for you. And obviously, whilst I wish I could do that, it'd be a very long episode because we would have to go through every single industry and every single country because different countries will have different ways that they refer to people. But essentially, a decision maker is the person who is qualified. So they are qualified by virtue of their job title, which means that they are somebody in a position of high responsibility. Now, this means that we're not talking to marketing assistants if we want to sell big communications packages, right? Because they are not qualified internally. By virtue of their job title, assistant, they are unlikely to meet the other criteria for being a decision maker. Okay, so the first thing we look for is, do they have a qualified job title? Are they somebody who is going to be responsible for my area of specialism? So as somebody who's in the sales training space, it is absolutely pointless me talking to anybody, literally anybody, who sits in the ops division. Because in operations, they are absolutely focused on streamlining processes, making things run more efficiently and effectively. But are they down with the day-to-day nitty-gritty of sales and business development and lead generation? Absolutely not. They're not going to make decisions around that. Now, there are some places where we're going to refer to these as unicorns, because I know that whenever I say statements like this, people go, oh yeah, but I know one company. I would like to ban that phrase for the rest of 2026. Yeah, but I know this one, one company, one process, one person. Like, one is not a big enough data set to judge the rest by. So in some small organizations, you might have an ops director or a COO who has a particular interest in sales. Yeah, maybe. But for the majority of decision makers that I work with who are interested and actively invested in my area of specialism and responsible for making decisions about it, they're probably going to sit in sales or HR, talent development, depending on level of professional that they want me to work with. Operations, just not a thing for me, So you have to first think about, by virtue of their job title, is this person going to be somebody who is making decisions about my area of responsibility or specialism? Okay. The second thing that we look at for a real decision maker is, are they a budget holder? And what I mean by that is, are they at a level in the organisation where they are entrusted to spend money on behalf of the organisation? Are they given an amount each year that they are able to allocate autonomously to external suppliers? And again, this is where job title can also help, because somebody who is working at an assistant level is probably not going to have autonomy over budget. And again, before anybody gets upset about this is not me saying that people who work at junior levels in organisations are not valuable people, they're not doing valuable work. It is to remind you that they are technicians in roles as junior employees before you become a leader in an organisation. Your job is to be really good at doing your job. Your job is not to make strategic decisions about outsourcing or external supply or anything like that. It is to be really good at doing whatever the job is you're supposed to be doing. Okay? So you would not hold budget as a junior employee. You might hold your own learning and development credits. So you might be able to have an amount of money each year that you spent on your own learning and development. You might be able to purchase things like client entertainment or transport or something like that to an event that you have to go to for work, but you're not going to be given strategic budget oversight. Okay. And qualified decision makers or real decision makers they will have a budget each year. They will know how they want to spend it, and they will be given autonomy to be able to do that and make the right decisions. And the final thing that we look for in a real decision maker is sign-off power. And this is because when we talk to people in organizations, even people at really high levels, if they are not responsible for your area of specialism, they might be somebody who is involved in the saying yes, the sign-off process. But if they are not the main person involved in that, or the final decision maker, the final person to sign things off, then sometimes it can be a bit tricky because you are having to build relationships with literally every other person in the organization before you talk to the person who's actually going to sign the dotted line. Okay. So when we talk about qualified decision makers, we're looking at qualifying them by their job title, qualifying them by the fact that they would be responsible for area of specialism, and qualifying them by the fact that they would hold autonomous budget that they can spend and be able to sign off on any major decisions. All right, that's what a qualified decision maker looks like. Now, that's in comparison to an influencer. So I think the interesting thing about influencers is when we talk about them, people can get a little bit caught up and think that it's only juniors. So, I talked about assistants earlier, and that's not the case. Influencers in an organization are defined by being people who are interested or invested in the sales process or the outcome that it will present, but who are not necessarily qualified by their area of specialism and how they would make purchases in your area of specialism. So they could be a director level employee, but they wouldn't necessarily have your area as one of the specialisms that they look after, have budget for, or have sign off for. But they might be, if we take that executive coaching example from earlier, they might be somebody who is really interested and would be a great end user and wants the organization to use you. And they could absolutely be an awesome champion for you, if they are prepared, if they are confident enough, and if they have the internal network and influence to be able to go to actual decision makers who are able to buy your services because it is under their remit, because they do have sign off, because they are the budget holder for it. Influencers can be really great at championing you and helping you network in an organization and helping you build relationships with the right decision makers so that they can use or benefit from your services. But influencers are usually people who, like say, might be involved in sourcing options for the real decision maker to look at when it comes to services. They might be somebody who's personally interested, heads of ERGs, for example, are usually incredibly interested and invested in specific areas, but they don't always get given budget. And they often have to go and ask other departments to allocate spend for them. And they might not, they might be somebody who is wanting to use your service, but might not be at the level who can sign off themselves, and they might have to go away and create that internal network to help do that. So essentially, what we're saying is decision makers, by way of their title, make the decisions, they have the sign off, they spend the money. Influencers are people who can champion you in the organization and help you build relationships around the organization that would help eventually get to a sale. But you're not necessarily going to generate revenue from an influencer. And that shouldn't be the intention. If you have lots of relationships with influencers within an organization, you should be focused on how can I make sure that they are supporting me moving the sales process forward, rather than do I need to keep always building the best relationship with them, even though it's not really getting me anywhere. And I realize that sounds like quite a transactional way to approach a relationship. And I think, when we work in sales, which you and I and every single person who runs a business does, we always want to focus on this relationship-based piece. And I get that. And I agree with that. I've had clients that I've worked with for years and years and years and really like as people. You know, I've had clients that I've worked with for very short periods of time who've literally only worked with me because they want the result that I can help them get. And then I've never heard from them again. You know, it doesn't mean that we don't need to or should avoid following sales processes with people. And what I mean by that is you can be as relationship focused as you want, but if the relationship is only one way, and sometimes with influences in an organization, it can end up becoming that way because they will take as many insights as you can give. They will attend as many events as you can put on. They will download as much content as they can get their hands on from you. But if it's always one way and it's never coming back because they're not able to introduce you internally or they're choosing not to, then actually what you've got there isn't even an influencer anymore. You've just got a relationship that you're working really hard at and that the other person is getting a lot of gain from, but it's not mutually beneficial. Therefore, it's not really a relationship. It's just a weird taking scheme. Okay? And so we have to be mindful that your time literally is money. Because for every minute that you are spending and every hour that you're spending on relationships with people that aren't mutually beneficial, so they're not leading to a sale or they're not leading to introductions or they're not leading to something that is productive for you and vice versa, it is wasted money because we're just pouring into these relationships that aren't paying off instead of taking that time and building other relationships that can be more fruitful for both parties. Okay. So I don't want you to think, oh gosh, it's all really transactional. It isn't, but it's also about setting boundaries and expectations. You know, I'm friends with my friends because we all do things for each other. When my friends are sad, it's my job to check in and it's my job to be strong for them and it's my job to support them. And when I'm sad, it's their job, right? That's because that's how it works. And it's the same in any mutually beneficial relationship that you have in any area of your life. If it's not mutually beneficial, then it isn't working. Yeah. And, you know, obviously there are lots of therapists out there who would also caveat that with it's not always equal all of the time. So, you know, don't apply this to your marriage or something. Be like, whoa, all of this week I've been doing everything for my partner and they've done nothing for me, so I must get rid of them. That is categorically not what I'm saying. But you're all sensible people, you know that. So now that we understand the difference between a decision maker and influencer, we also have to ask the question or answer the question, really, in my case, does it mean that influence aren't important? Well, of course not. You know, absolutely influence is important. Absolutely. Even junior employees are important to know because one day they will get jobs that are in leadership positions where they are a decision maker. So it's important to create relationships with everybody, but the amount of time that you spend on them is going to be different, you know, and what you can reasonably expect from those relationships is going to be different than if you are building relationships with clear decision makers who have sign off, who have responsibility for your area of specialism and who can actually pay you. You know, it's going to be very different. So if you want to network an organization really well because you want to get to know them better, you want to understand how they work, you want to understand, you know, more around the challenges that they might face, you might end up talking to a lot of influencers. You know, you might end up talking to a lot of employees there in various ways. I know that when I go into organizations, I do a lot of work with sales teams and looking at what we call sales enablement. And so I'll always end up talking to marketing departments and heads of marketing about, you know, what sales is and maybe is not doing when it comes to their plan and how that's hindering them or helping them, so that I can understand more about how the organization is currently working and how it wants to work so that I can improve their sales function overall. You know, but that happens when I'm in an organization. It doesn't happen during my sales process because most heads of marketing are not going to go to anybody and say, oh, you know, I met this really cool sales sales consultant the other week. Should we have a chat with them? It would just not be in their remit, you know? So we have to think about the amount of time and energy that we put into the relationships with influencers, and we have to manage our expectations around what comes out of it. Because again, if we're talking to the real decision makers or the qualified decision makers, sales decisions are made much quicker and we generate much more revenue because our focus is on generating revenue, because we're talking to people who are talking about opportunities and gaps and challenges that we can actually support. Yeah. So influencers are important and relationships are important, but when your time is limited, and for most of you who listen to this, it is limited. You're busy, you're parents, you're entrepreneurs, you're actually delivering for clients, you're doing all those things. You don't have time to spend on endless, what I would call networking calls. You know, you have to make the best use of time. And so your week or weeks shouldn't be full of these networking calls where you're like, oh, this person might be able to, in the future, help me get to know the organization and maybe introduce me to whatever department it is you're interested in. That's not where the majority of your time should be spent. You know, the majority of your time should be spent with decision makers where you're saying, this person very clearly has responsibility for my area of specialism. They are the people who allocate the budget. And I know that they are the final decision maker or that they are a big part of the sign-off process. So I know that any gaps that they highlight to me or any challenges that they're facing, they are going to be responsible for solving. And therefore, it's a good opportunity for me to position solutions, to make sales, and generate revenue. Okay. And actually, it's one of the things that I think the Expert Services Directory does really well is that, you know, for 12 months, even if you aren't able to prioritize proactive lead generation all of the time, you know that your listing is there in the background, working for you to generate inquiries and generate leads for 12 months alongside your other sales processes that you're running with influencers in organizations or with decision makers in organizations that you already know and other lead generating efforts. So if you've listened to this and thought, oh, maybe I need to go back and have a little bit of a look at my database and see whether or not I am targeting the right people, I would thoroughly recommend that. You know, people say to me all the time, oh yeah, but if I go back and look at my database, it's going to be 3 hours worth of work or a day's worth of work. And I think, well, you know, we talk as entrepreneurs a lot about being focused on quality. And I can't stress it enough. Quality sales processes really help you to generate revenue much more quickly and much more smoothly than putting things off because you're like, oh, it's going to take a lot of time and maybe I'd be better off making a post on LinkedIn or writing an email or whatever. If you know that you haven't gone back and looked at your existing database in a while, no matter how big or small your database is, go back and have a look and think about, who is it full of? Is it full of people who can actually make decisions and who have that autonomy over budget and who are going to sign off on major decisions? Or is it people who are influencers? Is it people who can maybe make introductions if they feel confident enough to, if they have the internal network or skill to be able to do that? And if you find that you have lots of influencers, your job is to go out and get some decision makers on your database and do proactive lead generation in the right way with whichever method you choose. And if you have lots of decision makers who are not currently turning into sales, you need to do something about that, you know, and you need to think about, how am I encouraging, you know, more sales calls? What am I doing activity wise to be able to generate more revenue from these relationships that I've built? Now, remember, if you buy the Expert Services Directory now, you can also access my expert guide and templates to use for your listing to regenerate conversations that you've had with decision makers that you don't know how to approach anymore, or maybe it's got a bit awkward, maybe they ghosted you after a proposal and they've never spoken to you again, or to empower influencers to actually get you in front of the real decision maker. So if you do buy a spot in the Expert Services Directory now, you will also get this expert guide and templates to use your listing to regenerate conversations with those decision makers, to also help you empower influencers to get you in front of the right decision makers, and to use your listing to recover other sales processes that you've had running that didn't turn into revenue over the last 12 months as well. So if you want access to that, all you have to do is go to expertservicesdirectory.com, sign yourself up, use the code podcast at the checkout, and you will be in. All right, I will see you in the next episode.